No is the short answer. If they're in the same family, that it's not classed as a house in multiple occupation. The question about households is probably the important question, because only if they're not related to each other are they a different household, and that's when you end up in HMO category. So if it's a couple, their own children, even stepchildren, down to cousins, they can still share the same house and not be classed as unrelated. So they're related family. One family, selective licensing. Multiple families, could get multiple families in houses, goes across to a HMO. So it's more rare. No, because then you've got 3 people, but they're 2 or more households, because they're unrelated. The 2 women are unrelated. So that's, it's just the legislation is written like that. In that situation, you'd have to look at a HMO license. If there's 2 unrelated people sharing, and then there's a child as well, that's a HMO. But then I was talking to a gentleman in the break. Then if it's going from a family occupation to that occupation, it might be planning territory as well. And in Nottingham, we've got a planning requirement. Unmarried couple, then that's different because they're cohabiting. We set the fee in November, so it's very early days. We've emailed 79 landlords that have got what we think 8 from our data, 8 or more flats being managed by 2 or fewer people. Because sometimes the manager on the application is just two different people, but they work for the same company, so they put 2 different email addresses. So when we looked at common management, we've gone to 2 managers, not just 1. We've given them the option to come back to us to do the calculations themselves, because when you're talking to some properties have got 200 flats and some of them have got 8. So we've gone to as many as we think will fall within the criteria, but it's just been set 2 months ago. We were going to review our fees. We're committed to that annually, or at least review them to see whether they're going to change. It's a bit of an unknown because we've not done it before, but we've set it at what we think is reasonable, and where we think cost recovery for the team to be able to support inspections, because one of the things that block licenses do, we're going to pre-inspect before the license is issued. So it's a different way of recognising that they're a higher risk property. And I don't want to again steal Steve's thunder, but we recognise a higher risk property, so we'll pre-inspect. So that's where the fee is more front-loaded with block licenses. The main change with the accredited fee is the first part of the fee, which is the part, we call it the Part A fee, which is mainly the administrative work before we issue the licence. And we found that actually that work is very similar whether you were accredited or not accredited. So that's where the fees change. It's mainly in the Part A fee. The accredited landlords, we're now dealing with about 30% of all our properties in Nottingham are accredited under selective licensing scheme so far. It used to be about 5% that the number of properties that we estimated were accredited. Selective licensing has driven more landlords to become accredited. So it's nothing to do with where, how many, or anything like that. It's just actually how much time are we taking dealing with accredited landlords, and how much time are we spending dealing with non-accredited landlords. The figures are very similar.
Well, I mean, as far as the fee increases are concerned, I would just reiterate that everyone who's already paid the existing accredited fee is not going to be asked to pay extra when the fees increase. But we had to be able to justify the, and actually look into the actual costs of processing the licensing. And as I say, the scheme has to wash its face. The council doesn't have money to put into selective licensing. It's a ring-fence scheme, and nor are we allowed to make a profit from it. So it was a very lengthy calculation to figure out what would be a reasonable level of fee to put against each licensing scheme. But I don't know the answer to the second point of the question. Do you? We
gave landlords up until the date of the scheme starting to get accredited. So that was right up until the 1st of August. Okay, so it was, so we worked really closely with Linda at Dash, and we said to landlords, if you get accredited, you could get a temporary number from Dash, recognising that landlords wouldn't be able to go on a course, but they could fill in the application and they could get themselves down as Dash accredited. Didn't have to go on a training course by then. That's all online anyway with Dash. So we worked really closely with Linda at Dash at the time.
And when was the public consultation for selective licensing?
The public consultation for selective licensing was in 2017. It's about, it was started about 3 years ago. Yeah. So the scheme has been in and around Nottingham being talked about quite widely for 3 years now.
So the short version is we can take enforcement action against owner-occupiers under Part 1 of the Housing Act 2004 to address some of the issues you're talking about. Obviously, they're not a licence condition that we can use for an owner-occupier, but also our pollution team have powers under the Town and Country Planning Act Section 215 to deal with properties that are actually detrimental to the local amenity. So there is powers available to the local authority. If those properties are reported in, they'll fall into our triage system and they'll be dealt with appropriately. So yes, there is powers to deal with owner-occupier. If they're next to some of your rented properties and you feel they're having this effect on your properties, then again, report that in and we can deal with that accordingly for you.
I mean, if I can just say to you, I'm the ward councillor for Baseford, and I'm out in my ward every weekend walking around the streets of Baseford. So I personally report things myself that I know are hazardous. And I also do, and I know all of my colleagues do as well, what are called doorstep surgeries, where very often you'll be called through by a homeowner to the back garden to say, look at my neighbour's back garden, there's rats in there, there's dog feces everywhere, it's full of junk, basically. And so we do regularly ask community protection to go out and speak to the people who live in those homes, no matter what their tenure, actually, and say to them, you must resolve this issue. It's not as quick a process as Duncan says, as when somebody has a licence and a landlord, and we have that landlord's contact details. But I do remember before selective licensing, there was a really poor property in Mapperley that was completely overrun with rats. The neighbours were at their wits' end, and we just could not track down the owner of this property, where they actually lived, or any contact details for them. And so that, like you say, that house actually brought down the whole neighbourhood, all the surrounding properties, damage to the surrounding properties as well. So it's something that our community protection teams do on a regular basis. And certainly our Labour councillors, we go out and we actively talk to residents in particular localities to actually ask them what problems they have and what we can do to help. And asking community protection to go along and speak to people is one of the things that CP do that the police don't have time to do. So CP will sort out a lot of those issues that the police just don't have the time to deal with.
I think your point's well made, actually, and kind of future-proofing how our estates might look. So I'll take that on board, absolutely. In terms of that, it just occurs to me there have been a couple of things that aren't necessarily directly in our remit this evening. But, the chap who's got the office next door to me at work, he's responsible for our community protection officers, our uniform personnel. So I think at the next time we do one of these events, I'm probably going to ask for some of his kind of leadership to come along so you can engage with them and actually see what they do and how you can build a relationship in various bits of the city. So I'm going to, if I can, but thank you for that question.
No, I mean, as the issue was that, and it's been in the headlines a couple of weeks ago, that Liverpool City Council, when they originally introduced their selective licensing scheme, you could apply for a whole city licensing scheme, and they did that. And then they've tried to renew that scheme on a whole city basis and had it turned down. And our understanding is they are considering whether to appeal that decision or not. But I think David explained to me it was about 2 years after the Liverpool scheme came in that the government gave an indication that they would not accept city-wide schemes. And it's because, you know, there are parts of the city where there's a completely different mix of tenured properties, or it's clear that the houses are of such a standard that we had to put together a big comprehensive case, and we got a special consultant in to do it. You have to evidence antisocial behaviour, poor standards of housing. We had to get all the crime figures for each of the neighbourhoods as well. And so we could only put the case forward to, and also you have to have a certain density of private rented houses, and it's sort of like the accumulative effect of them as well. So I think like the student areas of Lenton would be, where there's lots of rented properties, and in Radford as well would be a clear and obvious area where you could say there's definitely a case here for selective licensing. So that case had to be made across each of the geographies of the city where the scheme works. And so we had to put forward that case because we had conversations with the government where they basically indicated if you put forward for a whole city scheme, you won't get it. So that is the reason why there are parts of the city, because it couldn't be justified in those parts of the city because it doesn't have the levels of private rented property, and the private rented properties that are there were not causing health issues, antisocial behaviour issues, crime issues, and not triggering complaints from rented tenants either. The evidence was pretty robust that was put forward, and I think it's actually on the website if you want to go in and read it for yourself, but we had to put forward a really strong case for each of the areas that we wanted the licensing scheme to cover, and where we didn't think we would succeed, we didn't risk applying for, like, we could have had the whole scheme turned down on that basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would just add that we still have officers within the team, within the Safer Housing team, Duncan's world, that deal with complaints from tenants across the whole city. So there is still a universal offer for tenants living in poor accommodation, whether it be in Woollerton, whether it be in Bilborough, that are outside the additional licensing, the mandatory, or the selective licensing scheme. They are all there.
And just to say, I'm also a magistrate on the Nottinghamshire bench. Before I became elected, I was allowed to deal with Nottingham City Council cases, and one of the cases I dealt with was a very, very substandard property. But by the time of the hearing I dealt with it, it had taken 2 years to come to court. And this individual who owned this property had I felt deliberately frustrated the legal process by changing solicitors, not turning up to court dates, putting in paperwork late, etc., etc. So 2 years down the line, we were still nowhere near resolving a really dangerous property because of the frustration of the legal process. And so certainly what selective licensing done is if we find a dangerous property, we can get it improved really quickly, and people are safer because of that. I think the issue we had, as you're well aware, because we've engaged at length in email with yourself, is that from the moment the government gave us the get-go to set up the licensing scheme, we had exactly 3 months. So we did as much pre-preparation work as we could, but until we got the go-ahead, we couldn't actually recruit staff or get the systems to, obviously we had the systems ready to go, but we couldn't actually get those systems up and working. So the constraints of the legislation to do with selective licensing are out of our hands. That said, the system crashed for at least 2 months because of the weight of applications coming in on it, and those software issues are not easy to resolve. If you call us on a Monday, we're not going to be able to sort out the hardware by the following Friday. Those software issues took a period of time to resolve. If you don't mind. As for listening to landlords, we've said repeatedly since I took over from here, we are here to listen to landlords and actually improve the process, which we've done, and set up regular forums, which you're at one, and also engage constructively with landlords and people from the private rented sector, all the key stakeholders, so that we are listening and responsive. But some of the problems that initially came up didn't have quick solutions. And so I think rather than harking back from what's happened previously, which we can't change, and I note your regular complaints on this issue, I think we have to move forward now in a constructive way. We will set up our liaison group and we will deal with people who are happy to give us constructive feedback and work together with us to resolve issues. And, you know, I thank Giles Inman, actually, from EMPO, who has actually engaged constructively with the council, and we've brought in improvements and listened to some of the things he's said in relation to the sort of thing that landlords want, which is all to do with the just under £100,000 that we've bid for, which is all about helping landlords improve housing in the city. So I hope that gives you your answer. Thank you.
I don't think the correct approach is to delete a record when you have investigated it and found it to be vexatious or frivolous. That's not the right approach. The correct approach would be to record it as vexatious or frivolous. And I'll give you an example of a property where we had 13 complaints about antisocial behaviour, and we carefully examined each one of those and found it to be completely unfounded and granted the licence again the full number of occupants that the landlord had requested without any extra additional conditions.
And how do we get consent? How do we get confirmation that has been removed and marked as vexatious from the database? Because that's the crux issue. It is an issue on licence.
It's recorded, so the officer looked into those and assessed them and decided that the word frivolous and vexatious and recorded it as so. And if a landlord gets back to us and they investigate it and they find that that is the case, which is now a license condition on new licenses going forward, then it's recorded as so. But it's not the right approach to delete it, that there was no allegation ever made. It will be eventually deleted. We do have a data deletion policy. Just to repeat myself, so I was asked about how if a landlord investigates an allegation of antisocial behaviour, how that would be removed from our system, from the case file that we hold for that property. And I explained that isn't the right approach, that if a landlord investigates antisocial behaviour as part of their license condition and they find that it's not true, it is unfounded, then we'll record that the landlord has done that because that's their license condition. Their license condition is that they need to keep a record of those allegations for the duration of their license. And if we ask for those, they must be provided to us within 7 days of what their findings were from that investigation. So it isn't the right approach that a landlord keeps a record of their investigations, but we delete all our allegations when he finds that they are unfounded. More than happy to provide you with a confirmation that we accept your investigation and you find that the allegation was unfounded and it is recorded as so on the file for the property. That's not a problem at all.
Council policy now?
It's a process that I can create. It's not anything difficult at all. I believe so. Our phone number is 915-2020. The customer or the colleagues in the contact centre will do their best to put you through to us. Our email address is really easy to remember as well. It's hmo@nottinghamcity.gov.uk. Email us directly, or David's team is selective.licensing@nottinghamcity.gov.uk.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that has been a developing strand since I took over the operational side of safer housing. And I think at the time, we didn't anticipate how difficult it was to actually get in contact with the number of landlords who own properties in the city. And, you know, there are language issues, there are geographical issues of people not living in the city and some of them living in different countries as well. And also, as Dave here always explains it really well, we sort of have three different sorts of landlords. We have very professional and very responsible landlords who are really linked in to what's going on as far as housing regulation is concerned. We then have another cohort of individuals who we almost call them sort of accidental landlords who've either inherited a property and decided to rent it out, or inherited a sum of money or got their pension fund out and decided to invest that in property as well. And they're kind of like, they're the people that we're trying to reach out to help understand the very basic standards that we're asking as far as private rented housing is concerned. And then there's a third cohort of landlords who, you know, would be classed as rogue landlords, who effectively renting out their properties, sometimes in overcrowded situations, and very often very, very unsafe, dangerous properties with fire risks and, you know, windows that don't open and doors that don't lock and all sorts of really serious hazards, who are the ones who we're actually tracking down. And so as far, it's the middle cohort of people who are landlords, and but they don't seem to have picked up on the fact that we have a licensing scheme here in Nottingham. Those are the individuals who we want to work with to help educate them and help them, if you will, through the licensing process. And as I say, we've bid for this sum of money, so we've worked really closely with Giles and the EMPO landlords organisation as well to develop the bid for that funding, which was put together from all of our partners to say, right, how can we actually help landlords who want to do the right thing, but who perhaps not connected to sort of like the housing regulation that's out there at the moment, which I know is a very complex area. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I'll just add to that when I first came to the team, we talked quite openly about rogue landlords, and I've said this previously, but to reiterate that, we still want to pursue rogue landlords for absolutely sure. But actually, you know, if I ask a question here, who's a rogue landlord, I suspect I wouldn't get a hand going up. So on that basis, I think there'll be a cross-section in the market that range from the very, very good to the extremely poor. And I've said that to my team at management meetings. And part of what we're here to do is absolutely listen to what you as responsible landlords have got to say, how we can improve the way we do our business to help you improve your business. I accept the point that what you're saying is it's focusing on the negative. I hear that. I'll take that away. Lisa over there has come to the team relatively recently to look at comms. When we introduce the liaison groups, both landlords and agents, they will be a forum for us to actually listen to what you've got to say. We're not always going to agree, okay? But we're going to listen, okay, and have a dialogue and an exchange. And hopefully, by that way, take things forward. Because, you know, there's people out there who we desperately want to track down, who we suspect are some of the real rogue landlords who actually some of the most difficult conditions citizens are living in.
I mean, can I just say they don't discriminate, because I had one of those letters as well. So I had a snotty letter from Community Protection as well, giving me 2 weeks' notice to trim back the trees at the front of my house, which had overgrown the pathway. They'd actually gone to deal with a neighbour's tree and then noticed that mine were heading in that wrong direction as well. So yeah, the tone of the letters that CPOs send out, I mean, presumably they'd gone out by appointment to see the neighbour's property and speak to the landlord of that property, but then they'd notice mine as well. So I don't, obviously, community protection is kind of like, comes under the remit of Andrew Errington, and I will ask him to have a look at the tone of the letters. But as far as actually, I don't know how practical it is for them to arrange appointments to actually meet people at the properties. One of the things that selective licensing has enabled us to do is we now know, and we have a growing database of who actually owns each property in the city. So the CPO might not have been aware about the fact that it was a rented property and that the owner didn't actually live at that property. But now we will have this database of information. We'll be able to get in much more direct contact with the individuals so that we don't have any delays or further escalation of proceedings unnecessarily. Well, I mean, and I'm presuming that's something we can share with the liaison groups. I wouldn't have a problem sharing that information. The money can't be used for anything else. So, and we're not vexatiously, putting up the fees in order to make a profit on this, because there's no point doing that, because the money is ring-fenced and it can't be spent on anything else at all. So, I mean, I don't know if you can shed any light on this, David, at all.
I mean, your cigarette packet calculation. Sorry. I mean, your cigarette packet calculations are pretty good. But you'll have seen on one of David's slides, actually 75 staff. So that's a significant investment. There'll be other things, property that we have to rent and on cost. But there's no reason, and if you go on the council's website, actually, much of it is there. I think you'll find in terms of, because we've had a significant number of Freedom of Information Act requests, goodness knows how many we've run into, but a lot of information is already there. But there's no reason why we couldn't actually share that information with you, in my view. So you can have the granularity if that's what you require. But what I can assure people is there is no profit making in this scheme. We brought Lisa on board. That's to actually try and facilitate the business of the scheme, to get messages out there and make it work for us and you and tenants. But you can have the breakdown if that's what's required.